Well, and there's also the thing about technologies now. People think there's a barrier to doing things, but they're actually a lot simpler than they think. They just need to get there first. So when I first met Jim, he was giving a session about doing it on his own. And I was thinking of having my own domain, but I thought it would be too complicated. I'm a computer scientist who hates computers. So I'm not the kind of person who likes to do programming or any of that. But I saw the backend for cPanel, and it was so simple. You install the WordPress thing, and it works like WordPress. The hosted one, except it's yours. And you have more options. You just need to know where to find them. That's it. And that's not that difficult for a non-techie faculty member to know how to do. They just need to know that it's that easy.
Yeah.
Why aren't you talking about Ethos?
Because we're live now?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Good work.
So
let's start. We started this presentation, I think if we go to the first slide, and this, I'm going to start. This is what I'm told by Maha is Ethos. I can't attest to this.
Or in some language. The dictionary. Said that.
Yeah. But I love this kind of definition of this notion of an ethos. The characteristic spirit of a culture, era, or community as manifested in its attitudes and aspirations. And this idea of an ethos is very different than a policy, right? Or a rule, or a law. It's often communal, it's often decided upon. It's also a positionality to the work we do within that community. And so Maha and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we understand this concept of an ethos in relationship to the work we do. So that's how we're framing this notion of ethos, and we'll specifically be talking about educational technology and the specific tools we use. We've mentioned a little bit about the LMS already, so there will be a little kind of preface to things to come. Now,
the first question is, let's step back from technology for a second. And what is the ethos of higher education? Why do we do what we do, and what's the culture behind what we do? And we'd like you guys to answer that, and we've scheduled the tweets on Twitter.
Yeah.
So people will see those questions on Twitter as well, and we'll see if they're responding. So.
It's a really great question, right? Let's return to, I really liked President Hodges' discussion today, right? Because it returns to some fundamental questions about what it is we do, whether it's librarians, technologists, and under the idea of the academy or the university, what in general would you define as a group or individually as the ethos of our academies that we work for, our institutions? What are they? I mean, honest question.
Anybody?
It's good to know we don't have an ethos, right? Right? Isn't that from the Big Lebowski? Say what you will about National Socialism, at least it's an ethos. I mean, is that how we feel? Is that the academy?
I feel like fundamentally it's supposed to train people on how to think. Yes?
Yeah. So ethos, what we're doing is training people how to think. The means by which what we think. What else?
I have to tell you that I read, I keep reading the American ethos of higher education is how to prepare students for the democratic process.
Right? What about framing the citizen, right? That's the kind of ethos behind education. We hear it all the time about K-12, right? And in the university.
Related to that, it's bringing people into contact with things that they wouldn't otherwise come into contact with. Whether that's people, thoughts,
right? Maybe technologies.
technology.
Maybe books.
But
right?
where do we talk about whose ethos?
Yeah.
Because that talked about a shared, that it's a shared thing, but I think there are a few, because I would never say this, but I feel like I'm hearing all the time that it's to create a worker.
Mm-hmm. Right. And more so, obviously, for professional schools than liberal arts schools, supposedly.
Yeah.
But like for AUC, one of the goals is professional skills, other than the more liberal arts ones.
And we hear this a
Neoliberal.
lot as an attack on the very schools we're part of, right? Liberal arts, like
What are you doing to create, to get people ready for the workforce?
I'm paying X amount of money, you're not actually preparing me for a viable job. Not to mention the fact that we don't really know what a viable job is in 10 years, but like the idea is diametrically opposed from the ethos that says we're supposed to produce critical, well-rounded, thoughtful thinkers. Right there, we have an ethos problem. What else?
Lifelong learning.
Right? The fact that you start a process that goes on well beyond. And I'd be interested to think about how the technology we use supports or takes away from that ethos.
I think it's a force.
Yeah, so take a look at that. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, we'll go back to that
Yeah.
question with all the technologies we talked to. But
Question everything.
Question?
including the university itself.
Yeah.
Like, and if we say that, if a university says it's equipping students to question things, when students question the university, how open is the university then to, and of course faculty question the university.
One of the things too, I mean, how many of you are familiar with the history of the internet, right? Does anyone know how the internet was built, and where it was built? Military, right? There's a couple of places, right? ARPA, right? Research, and they actually took a bunch of researchers from MIT, UCLA, Utah, folks in Britain, right? So it was actually a joint, it was business, it was the military, and a huge part of the protocols that undergird what the internet was were developed at universities, right? That idea of, I always think us being resold the internet, packaged. You want to get online and do it at the university? The very thing that we helped develop as an ethos for communication and sharing. Right? So at what point is the scholarly ethos of creating and building the best of the world's knowledge and building on it absolutely reified in the network structure of the internet itself? I struck that, that thing that happened in '69 is a part of our culture as institutions. I think sometimes we've denatured ourselves from it.
And I think also that, because it was interesting, all these answers were very much about, because this is a liberal arts community, they're all about teaching, and I now work at a big research university, and the ethos of the university is the production of scholarship.
Right.
Scholarship in a very, it's the producing of research outcomes,
Right.
whether they're, whether it's in a lot of forms. So it's nice to hear the notion that the purpose of higher ed is education.
Yeah.
Like the intentions, right? But I would also say I think the fact that the learning part and the production of knowledge in some are actually very distinctly framed, and the technologies that we use for them are really distinct when they're not accidentally part of the same kind of institution.
Right.
Well,
That's a very good point. And their intention in the
Yeah.
institution, right? It's like you usually choose to focus on one or the
Right.
other per faculty member, at least, if not per institution, but it's in that
Absolutely. And the ethos also undergirding research funding. And where some of that starts to get complicated. Who's funding what to do what research and why?
Right.
And so the ethos everywhere of big money
Yeah.
starting to kind of more and more inform that.
As we were preparing this presentation, we came up with the analogy with pharmaceutical companies and what it means when you're doing research with them and the kind of funding that they give. And then what does that mean for medical doctors when they prescribe a particular thing or they go to a particular conference funded by a particular company?
Yeah. Well, has anyone seen Ang Lee's Hulk? It's probably one of the least, it was like a superhero movie before superhero movies were popular. And many people hated Ang Lee's Hulk, and probably for good reason. But one of the things is Eric Bandel's Hulk. And he was like a scientist doing gene, science, right? And then he's basically like, the companies are coming in to buy his information. He's like, I'm just doing the basic science here for everybody. Like this kind of beautifully open concept of what we do as academics is the basic foundational research intellectual work that our culture is built upon. And that whole movie is about how this pharmaceutical guy comes in and is like, no, you don't. Actually, it's all mine, and I own it. And I know it's not necessarily probably why it wasn't good. Who wants to see a Marvel superhero movie about intellectual property? But, it was a very interesting for me moment. It's like Return to the Hulk. It's actually better than you would think, the early one.
Oh, that's interesting. Shall we?
Yes. Now, this is one of the questions Maha and I think Maha really did a beautiful job of framing this for us, is how do the systems you use at your various universities actually reinforce the ethos that we talked about?
And who makes those decisions?
And who makes those decisions?
Is it someone who comes up with a response like that?
So we have the grand theory, like free scholarship, critical thinkers, right? Open ideas, etc., research. Now let's get down a little bit more to the more granular, concrete. What systems do you have in place, lifelong learning, to make this a reality? And who makes those decisions? I'd like to hear like some of the systems you think support the ethos you talked about. Actually, just so you know, you're going to be a part of this presentation. So I actually will come around to, and I know you don't want, and talk about the 80s to you directly if you don't participate. That's a kind of a veiled threat. Actually, not that veiled. I'll start with the Bond movies. I'll work through, Back to the Future. So
Can anybody keep it up with all these movie references? Because I'm like.
So what are some of the, who makes the decisions? Where do the decisions about this ethos of your institution make? Administration.
Mission and vision of the university.
That's right. So you have administrators who make certain decisions about.
But I also think that it's the culture of the faculty also, let's say the majority of faculty that are, in some cases, conservative. I think higher education institutions are very slow to change.
Yeah.
And so I think if that culture changes, then maybe they can influence. It starts off at the departmental level, and then goes up.
But also, maybe in a second.
I just think that the students are driving all the change because when the student needs comes the courage of the faculty member to jump in this adventure, and then the administration would come.
That sounds pretty ideal. Does that actually happen at AUB?
Yes, pretty much, because when there's a force coming from the students, this is when we see change.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, when faculty members come up with a certain idea or a innovative idea, then it waits until we see that students are adopting.
This kind of reminds me of what Kathy Davidson did at Duke, where they had funding to get iPods, I think. Was it iPods?
Yeah.
And then she, 2000, around that time, and instead of giving it to faculty, she told students to design ideas for what to do with the iPods, and then the winning ideas, she made faculty do them. So it'd be that kind of model. But I think a lot of instances, the person who decides on the IT that the university is going to get is a department that's responsible for IT that doesn't necessarily consult with faculty or students or even faculty developers or anybody.
I know you had a hand up back there. Am I
No,
right?
I was just thinking that in our instance, I don't think that students are ready to change because, we have consistent complaints or consistent comments about teaching style and what they're learning, how they're learning, that have trickled up to the administration, but I don't see them making decisions based on what the students need. It's more of, our institution has no competitor, basically, in Egypt. There's no need for them to change what they're offering because we're the best at what they're offering out there. It's almost like it's
Monopoly.
It's a strange situation, it's static. What would make faculty change how they teach, knowing that the students need something different?
And is there,
Sometimes I think it's I call it professional jealousy. It's like when a faculty member sees another faculty member doing something interesting, I can see it in their eyes how when you see these, kind of like dollar signs on a cartoon. It's a different kind of dollar sign. It's a recognition that this is something I would love to do. But, so maybe faculty could drive more of the students.
well, it's interesting. Where would students even have the agency through what channels to voice that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just in terms of very kind of mundane here and prosaic. Is there a forum?
Just from what I remember from university.
Go, Robbie.
Just what I remember from university was they would use the student government as a platform for the student's voice. But then what always ended up happening was anytime the students had a request, we need more recycling bins, right? Then they take that idea, show it to the administration, the dean of insert, whatever, and then that dean talks to the higher ups, and then there's this friction of what the students want, and then what the mission of the university is, and then there's this period of nothing happening. So, and that's just what I remember from university. But that's the only platform I can think of where students voice their opinion. Even then, most people complained and didn't really have a solution. You know what I mean? It was hard to get the students' input and put in a form where administration can take it seriously and act upon it.
Yeah. At AUC we have students on most committees, but just one student.
Yeah.
And I'm a junior faculty member, and being in a room with 10 people, 5 of them deans or whatever, I don't really feel like I have a voice, even though I try to talk, and I'm trying to imagine if I'm a student doing that. And it's one student, and how do they represent that? So it's actually very difficult to get that student representation through and have their voice listened to.
Not on the Senate, though. I think the students in the
They
Senate
talk
are
in-
very.
They do. I remember we had a disinvestment push where the students asked the administration to disinvest from fossil fuels as an idea, and they didn't. So the students actually occupied the building, and they wouldn't leave until the administration actually had to arrest a couple of students. And that really was interesting in that it raised some real questions around this ethos and this question of negotiating who makes the decisions and what role we have in it. And that's an extreme example of it, although in the US there's a move for students to come together and divest of fossil fuels. But that's a very interesting example of, I don't want to wait for the recycling bins to be out there. I actually think this is important, and this is something that has a history, recent, right? I'm talking to a group of people who may live through it, as well as back to the 60s in the US, Columbia, Berkeley, right? This notion of occupy to actually make. Maybe we're a little bit off the subject of ethos, but I do think like this is what universities were understood as. Places where this stuff was hashed out.
Well, listen to this from Twitter. Mark Johnson is saying that in the UAE, these decisions are made on the ministry level. So you have to occupy the government, not just the institution. Like at AUC, students can get things done that way.
Yep.
But if it's on the level of the ministry,
Yep.
making those decisions for all of the institutions, that's a much bigger battle for then students to.
And we're really talking about this to think about how does the decision making versus the ethos start to come together and do that.
But I would also, I mean, I'm so, it's, moving to Penn has been fascinating, because I'm thinking the students, at the University of Pennsylvania, we have the Wharton students who are at business school, we have the medical students, and there is no the students. And if we're talking about the undergraduate students, I mean, at Haverford, the undergraduate students had a tremendous say. It was a really wonderful, supportive institution. But our work was to do all this framing citizenship and, teaching them how to think about things. Like, they aren't actually the best decision makers about some things, in that that's our job, is to help them get better at that.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying, I think students should be empowered in all sorts of ways, but I also, I guess I want to see the faculty, I want to
Engage
see
rather than just
right,
passively.
right, sort of saying like, well, when it comes to technology, there's like the students and there's the administrators, but the faculty see themselves very much as having a role in making the decisions about what and how students learn in every way, in some ways with the exception of when it involves technology, which is to say all the time.
I would say though, in the US, you see a complete disempowerment of faculty
Yes.
as a result of technology.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like you do have that reality
Yeah.
that stands there as an albatross or as the elephant in the room no one's talking about.
Right.
So there is that real reality we're faced, MOOCs being a perfect example.
And Penn being one of the
Yeah.
big MOOC makers. Which actually brings me to this. We're hoping this is going to be easy if we start an LMS bashing session. We're just going to say everything they don't like about LMS. That's one of the things that when I started being a faculty developer, we were all about helping faculty use WebCT and convincing them to use it. And then once they got used to it, we changed the Blackboard. And then we convinced them to use it. And then they got used to using it. And then they realized they don't like it. And we don't like it. But we still have it.
We still use it, and it's 15 years now, 16 years now.
And
Everyone
so-
hates the LMS, everyone
So
uses
what are your
the LMS.
reasons for hating the LMS?
Well, really, like, what is the ethos of the LMS? And your idea, for those of you who work with it, support it, teach through it, or are part of kind of maintaining it?
I feel like it's not like one size fits all. If it doesn't fit, we're gonna put it there anyway, right? Like it's to make it easy for the professor or any faculty member to do the things that they need to do electronically, and to do everything electronically that they need to do. Of course, like my opinion is you're not supposed to do that. Like you're not supposed to cram it all in there.
Yep.
But that's what it is. It's a big black box of everything. Yeah.
Teresa?
I think when Raga says that, I think it's least common denominator.
Yeah.
So it's like I can do, and sometimes it's administrative, and I wear two hats in here, so I wear an administrative hat. for a fully online high school, and we're running 90 semester courses, and we're doing it in Blackboard, and we all hate Blackboard, but we also, and I was thinking maybe like a unconference thing that I could do tomorrow would be, I don't know if you guys, anybody who's lived in the US has ever heard Stump the Cook on National Public Radio. So that's a cooking show. I mean, it's a food writer named Lynn Rossetto Caspers, and she used to play this game where people would call in and say, I have these 3 things in my refrigerator, and she'd say, here's how you can cook with them, like a splendid meal. And I really feel like I want to play Stump the Blackboard Administrator, like tell me what you want to do.
Yeah, let them figure it out.
And in case you can't do all these beautiful things that you guys are talking about, I'll tell you how to do it in Blackboard. But it's kind of like, I'm really mad at the world that I know these things. But I also think some of us, I mean, I was saying it to Hoda and to Aziza this morning, like some of us are married to Blackboard, or our institutions are, and I don't want to make like a split of this group between those of us who like really roll up our sleeves and work in it, and those of us who really roll up our sleeves and do all those small pieces that you're talking
Outside
about.
of it, yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because, I mean, like it was brought up before, like UMW uses a black LMS. I'm not sitting here saying, go free, right? Like, you know, go to a nudist beach or whatever and be free of the LMS. No, like, it's a reality.
Just questioning the ethos of it and how much of it you want to give into, or how much of it you want to hack, or how much you want to do in and out. I mean, Huda and I use Blackboard and do a million other things outside of it, but we still use Blackboard for some things. Diane, you wanted to?
I'm still questioning or doubting why are we flashing out this?
Oh no, we're just asking about the ethos, but we're just being funny about it.
Well, you talked about one of the things that makes me think about the LMS, lifelong learning.
Yeah.
Like, how does this embody that ethos? I'd be interested, yeah.
Well, I think it doesn't, but sometimes I think students should have a choice. So I think one reason that administrators choose LMSs is because it embodies a walled garden. So when the course is over, you take down the material, which means you take down students' work, which is in a way crazy, because you're not teaching people to like that whole digital literacy thing, you know. But on the other hand, I really think students have to curate their own work, and so maybe some things
like have their own portfolio outside,
right?
But then there are other people who have a Blackboard portfolio.
Yeah,
that sort of defeats the purpose.
Right.
But I get what you're saying. So you're thinking keep the walls for the walls, and then if someone wants to curate outside the walls, then they should do that independently.
Or have teaching that curation and what to bring out to the public as part of what you teach.
Rather than put everything public.
Rather than everything public.
I think Dr. Haidia, and then Angie, and then...
No, I was just going to say I'm going to do a presentation tomorrow on what research we did at the UC. And bottom line, it's I think it's common. The results are common to what has been done all over the United States. And people use the LMS. They don't like it, but they don't want to change. And those that are savvy or group, most of them, and surprisingly a fairly large number, are going outside. So they're comfortable using Facebook, Twitter, WordPress, whatever else they need to do. So, I mean, faculty seem to have been comfortable with this dichotomy. They're keeping it there for administration, and then they do collaboration and communication, anything that really matters outside. And so either we come up with something that is very different from what the LMS is today, because people don't think it is helping learning. Maybe it helps in the administration of learning, but not in the
there's a comment from Twitter from Autumn when she's saying, can we think of the LMS as the minimum, but not let the ethos of the LMS overtake the institution? So we're not saying forget about it, but just not let it be the end all and be all. So, okay, Angie, Dimitris, and then Anne.
I was thinking in terms of analyzing how people in an institution use LMS. I think reflects that which is there.
Okay, are you going to share that? Are you going to share that tomorrow? Yeah, because we've done research about this like long time ago, but this is new research.
But I do agree with you about the LMS reflecting the ethos. And for me, if the ethos is delete students' work after the semester, not give them their own space to communicate, right? To build a site that they'll work on and learn that they'll never use again on the open web. If that's the ethos, we're doing a great job. But I don't think that ethos aligns at all with what we are all saying this university academic experience is. I do think that the ethos of the LMS is diametrically in some ways opposed to the ethos of what we talk about when we talk about
Although, if we're talking professional skills, then yes, students are going to go out and work in the corporate world and work with SAP, which is closed, where they have to follow a system that makes no sense to them.
Yeah.
But they have to because that's the way it is, or it's a black box and you don't have a lot of control, yeah, then.
We're doing a good job.
Doing a good job.
We're actually preparing them for the real world. Yes.
I was going to say that there's a definite advantage to the LMS as well, which is copyright and fair use protection, because whether we want to export or download or upload all of the content, including faculty-owned and intellectual property and student content to the public, it can't be done on the NDOA now.
I would argue that we're actually doing a great disservice to our students and our communities by doing that. And here's my argument. We're doing that because it's still illegal to upload it to Blackboard. But you're doing it knowing it will never go out online and that conversation will never happen. So in fact, you're avoiding one of the most important conversations we need to have at the institution around intellectual property because it's inconvenient. And when we start dictating our discussions in Ethos around convenience and around intellectual property, we have, I believe, failed one of our missions.
Well,
So-
I
I
don't think we're trying to get around intellectual property because we actually enforce copyright law within our Blackboard system as much as we can.
But
And
I'm not saying even for your institution, but I know with the institution I use, like, we used Blackboard specifically because to put it out in the open web would be a problem. And so Blackboard became a place to hide.
Well,
The
because
questions
of
we
fair
needed
use.
to answer.
Because fair use allows you to use Blackboard for certain things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
But fair use is a
Instead
defense.
of, instead of trying to get open educational resources instead.
But I would say fair use, like, we don't, as institutions, really push on that, right? Because it's actually defense. And if we think critically around, okay, let's take the 80s exhibit. If that's our culture and that's what's defined us, if I told you that you can't quote 4 lines of Shakespeare in your paper, and you were like, what? I can't interact with a culture that's defined 400 years of thought? No, you can't. But yet, if I try and quote a minute of a film that has informed the way I think about it, I'm a pirate. I'm a copyright pirate. How can that be? This is the media that's defining who we are, whether it's a commercial, whether it's a TV, whether it's a film, yet we are completely forbidden to use it in any critical context. That is an abrogation of the academic mission at its very fundamental being. And we have put our heads in the sand as institutions and run away from it because it's inconvenient.
Jim, I want to, because I work in libraries and I couldn't agree with you more 100%. This is a point I'm obsessed with. But I will say, it's actually a point, I think, to some degree, at least in my experience, of tension between libraries and academic technologists and faculty. So if you have sort of libraries end up enforcing copyright, much, even though we are its most dire victims, the budget is ours because we have these relationships with publishers on the behalf of our institutions. And so libraries end up being these crazy copyright enforcers.
Yes.
And then academic technology is sort of gets to be free, like, oh, we don't have to worry about that, which they shouldn't, because no one wants to worry about it except we as an ethos should worry about it because it's plain wrong. But I think that there is a kind of, in the library, we don't have the freedom to say, we're not going to worry about copyright. I would like us to, and I work very hard at every institution I can to push librarians to be a little bit more bold in the way that they approach fair use. I think that's part of our work. But it is harder in the world of libraries because we have these relationships with publishers that we are, we have to.
I would actually say this. I mean,
And they might sue us.
to that, a lot of IT and educational technologists
Like,
default to actually the LMS for those very reasons, because that should be I think it shouldn't be the issue of the librarian or the educational technologist.
Right.
It should be about the experience of the faculty and the teacher struggling with these questions.
Yes.
And pushing on those lines with what is fair use. And not depending upon or blaming a faculty, or like someone said to me, you need to talk to us about copyright. It's like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to talk to you about copyright. I'm not going to pretend. If you want to go with me, you'd be arrested. I'm a full-blown pirate. But you need to have these conversations with your community. And I don't disagree with you at all about the questions of Blackboard and what it provides. I think broader, though, as academic communities, we're not having those conversations, and it does become the onus of the librarian or of the educational technologist or IT to manage what is fundamentally a scholar and teaching and learning issue. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of what an ethos like this technology starts to bring out.
I think they're political issues rather than technical issues.
Yeah.
But I am put in that position where I need to stop people from violating copyright as a faculty developer working with them, while I also write on Prof Hacker about how I'm anti-copyright and I don't think it works for the developing world because it stops knowledge from.
Absolutely.
but officially I don't. I try not to violate copyright on anything official I'm doing. I just try to not use copyrighted stuff in the first place.
I try actively to break copyright, I have to say.
But
And I
then
hate
also-
attributing anything to anyone.
Have you attributed any of the images?
No.
That's plagiarism, which brings us to this. Dimitri, you wanted to say something?
I want to say, Mark mentioned the T-bomb on Twitter.
The T-bomb, yeah, I saw it. I don't know if it was because of a scheduled tweet.
Does everyone know what this icon represents?
Yeah.
Very good. So some of you are familiar with this technology.
Okay.
I didn't know the full frame of it until I talked with Dimitri yesterday. When he told me more about it. But what's the ethos of Turnitin, if we're going to talk about ethos and technology?
Catch me if you can.
Andy?
I want to say a few things about Turnitin. We are using it for the first year, and maybe we'll continue, maybe we will not. It was kind of, people who finished the first year seminar really wanted to get it, and I happen to be the administrator. I'm not particularly active.
Yeah.
But I have to train people how to use it, and
Yeah.
I have to train them, explain to them what it means. So when I meet students and teachers, and especially students, I tell them, you can use this to see how can you learn to paraphrase better. But something that, like a good objection to this is, give students assignments they can't plagiarize. No one plagiarizes in my classes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one.
I administered Turnitin.com for 8 years or something? And then when I started teaching, after 1 year I stopped using it because my assignments were not plagiarizable. If someone plagiarized my assignment, it would be very obvious that I wouldn't need Turnitin. Because it's so personal. If you do something, if you're asking students to do something unique, I let my students see all the previous semester's assignments because they can't plagiarize from the students who did it last semester.
So is this a technology that we're supporting and reinforcing that actually fosters bad pedagogy, in other words?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it makes it about plagiarism, not about learning how to attribute or to own your own work. It's called an originality report, but it's actually detecting plagiarism.
An originality report, euphemisms.
Well, they say prevention, but I always say detection because they're not really preventing it. They are detecting it, and they assume that it's going to prevent it by detecting it. But students go around it really well.
Oh, yeah.
We discover new things. They put white colored periods and very
Is that right?
Yeah, because it makes it into a technical thing rather than an ethical thing.
Well, I'm going to play the devil's advocate because we can actually teach how to paraphrase.
Which is what Andrew was saying, and I agree. You
But
could do
then,
it.
but then let's look at in the case of Egypt, for example, and I'm not talking necessarily about UC, but copying and pasting is the natural way of doing things. And you have PhD dissertations and you have master's degree dissertations that are completely plagiarized. And that was because it was seen as not something, that there was no
That's what was
such thing.
expected in their
It was
exams.
expected, yeah, and so if you want to start changing the culture, and I think this is one of the reasons why it was adopted at the UC, was in fact to show that that is not okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of dissertations that I UC right now use them as a draft.
Yeah, but what it does mean though is that throughout their masters, they didn't learn it. So that by the time they're at the dissertation, they're still making those mistakes.
Well, maybe that's what you should correct, and maybe the tool could be
Start
used
working on it.
differently.
Even how it reinforces another ethos. Omar, you mentioned this point, which for me is fascinating. I don't know enough about Turnitin to say anything about it, but students have figured out how to hack it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's easy, and so what are we teaching them again? What is the lesson here? That these systems are arbitrary and need to be hacked.
Can I just say something about Turnitin? It depends how universities decide to implement this, because actually they could decide to open it up to students as a platform for them to test themselves. And this is a quite a cool tool actually, because I use it myself because I'm writing a PC and it's good because, you know, we go quickly onto things and we don't want to plagiarize it. It's useful and it's good. And I would recommend that everybody does that.
Yeah.
And students then, they are responsible for the work. They test themselves, they learn how to avoid, they do it better. And then they submit, and then the teachers can check them. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this, actually.
It's most faculty end up using it that way. The
I
other
think
side-
if we give them the opportunity to hack it and use it, I mean, it's really foolish. We need to open it up and for people to.
But I think that depends upon how it's used, right?
Which when we train people, we try to go for what you're saying. Doesn't always happen. I know we're running out of time, but I think we're gonna.
Not about this, we have a question.
Oh, you have okay.
We have a couple, I know.
There's a question on the YouTube
Yeah.
chat.
YouTube is asking Maha. Not have BB means, I think, before.
Yeah.
To teach, I don't understand how it violates or hides violation of copyrights. Can someone briefly
Explain how Blackboard overcomes that? Is that, well, because if I'm teaching a course and I want to use 3 chapters of a book that's copyrighted, if I put it publicly on the web, I could get sued. But inside Blackboard, people don't see it, and the fair use allows you to do a little bit more. Still not within fair use, but people do more.
One chapter.
Yeah, one chapter is fair use, but people do more, and it's hidden so that nobody's going to be able to see it. So I just wanted to say just one thing about Turnitin that's different from this point, is that when we ask students to use Turnitin, we don't give them a choice to use it, and so and then Turnitin profits from the student work.
Yeah.
By
using our student work against each
their
other.
intellectual property for grades, and that I think is a problem.
Which I know is put into a global system now, thanks to Dimitri, that is now not just about your local community, it's about a whole series of people who are feeding that. The other thing about Turnitin that's fascinating to me is, again, it reinforces an ethos of lack of trust, right? Probably against, but not more than that, it reinforces an ethos that the idea of you have a relationship to a technology that in some ways rules out the facility of the professor. And I think it's fascinating how willingly we engage that. Like, we engage our own demise. And I guess maybe that's what technology is good for, but I really getting on about
grading. I think, to be fair, this is just one tool. Right? And it's not what, how professors, and I hope this is not the only.
It's a prevalent one, though. It's very popular.
But
It's being used, but it's not the only one.
No.
And I also think it's again, we go back to how you use it. So I don't think you should condemn the
we're here
technology
just
as much as the faculty. So you're really not giving up.
But the
if you choose to give up, that's a different story.
Technology is not neutral.
Yeah.
The fact is that this technology was designed in mind to think of students as people who are going to try and take advantage of it, who would try and cheat.
I think the next tool is more balanced, Ryan, and then I'll.
It just depends on the part of the world, because in our part of the world, people do cheat. They do like to do this and everywhere. If you go to the US side, it's totally different.
They still cheat in the US?
No, they still cheat.
No, they do. I know they do.
But they know from earlier on that they shouldn't be.
The faculty members in the US are encouraging open book final exams, etc. So students who come from our side of the world, when they go there, they're fascinated by this. And the first thing they think, oh, I can cheat now.
License to cheat. License to cheat.
So,
this tool is a little bit more, less, they're like.
This one's a little bit more
kind of
rainbow.
like it.
No.
It has issues, but it's also, we still end up using it a lot. And it wouldn't let me log in from your computer today, but never mind.
Good. What's the ethos of Google? I mean, that's an interesting question, right? So we talked about Turnitin, and I like Turnitin because a lot of people are like, that's not direct. But this is something, how many people don't use Google in this room?
Please
You don't use it. You're Google free
What do you
and you're
search?
Google
No,
free.
I use Google Drive. I don't use Google Search.
But you use
You don't
Google.
use
I use
Google
Google
Search.
Drive.
Why don't you use Google Search?
Because I think that it's a, gosh, I
She's
don't
an
know.
upgrade.
You guys don't know.
What a question.
I might have lost all my credibility. I use DuckDuckGo, which is an open source search tool that DuckDuckGo. It's open source. I saw a talk by Safia Noble, who's an amazing, brilliant professor at, I don't know if you guys know who she is. She's a professor at, I think it's Ethos. She's a professor at Ethos. It's open source. I saw a talk by Safia Noble, who's an amazing, brilliant professor at, I don't know if you guys know who she is. She's a professor at, I think it's Ethos. It's open source. I saw a talk by Safia Noble, who's an amazing, brilliant professor at, I don't know if you guys know who she is. who talks about the ways that Google results are biased. The example that she uses is, she's a black woman, she works in the United States, she talks about Googling black girls, and her name is Safia Noble. She talks about Google black girls, and I think this has actually changed since her work has become so well known, but the images that Google shows you, the results are about, they're not, she talks about her daughters, and that if we agree to the idea that the top 20 things you might want to know about black girls are how they look, how and when and under what circumstances they might sleep with you,
objectification.
It's totally, it's not, it is not our agreed upon values that we use to rank. They have an algorithm. That algorithm is made by people. Those people are mostly people with a particular background, a particular set of values. They create algorithms that privilege certain things. They're not evil. They're just not thoughtful.
And it's filtering.
Yeah, it's filtering. It is not objective. It is anything but objective.
Yeah.
And I think it's useful for me as an exercise, as practice,
Yeah.
to try looking at the world through a different algorithm.
Right.
It's a learning way. So yes, I don't use Google.
So it's called Go?
Go.
Yeah. So, but the Google Drive now, I was applying for something for IRB to do research on something a little bit sensitive, imposter syndrome and stuff. It was supposed to be anonymous. They said apparently the Google policy is that Google can look into your documents and read it. And so you cannot do any confidential, really important research on Google Drive. I use it all the time. I would die. My life is on Google Drive. I would die without it. The second half of my life is on Google Hangouts. And I can't live without that either. But I know that you're being watched.
I recently had some dental issues, right? So I had to get an implant. So I was on Google, whatever, and all of my ads on Gmail are about implants.
Yeah.
How do they know?
How's your implant going? You need to go to a dentist? And it was really creepy. And this ethos that everything you do is being scanned, being read, and we've installed it, and we've come to accept that. And I think Google for us is the ethos of where do we balance convenience, which I think is a crucial element, and freedom with what we're willing to sacrifice.
And just when I met you and we were talking about hosting, all my YouTube ads were on hosting.
Yeah, exactly.
So YouTube knew what Twitter was doing. So we started late, so I'm just going to take 5 more minutes. If it stops the broadcast, that's fine. If people need to leave, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think I understand. We'll go very quickly, okay?
Yeah.
So virtually connecting is this thing where we allow people who cannot come to a conference get access to the conference and talk to speakers and things like that. And so we use Google Hangouts because the ethos of it is access and being free and all that. And we're volunteers, and it's a guerrilla movement where it's not institutionalized. And we use Google Hangouts because we need the free and the accessible. And it's actually not accessible everywhere in the world, like some countries don't allow you to. But for the most part, it works for what we need. And so we'll use Hangouts, but what we won't do is we won't let Google sponsor us. And we won't take a corporate sponsor of any kind because we don't want our ethos to be taken over by someone else and to lose our guerrilla-ness. And so what we're doing now is if we need funding, we do crowdfunding, and the volunteers and the community can fund us if they want to, or offer us free entrance into conferences, or support us the way AMICAL is supporting us just to have something here and so on.
And it's interesting, too, the notion of an algorithm, that no matter what tools we use as part of the community, we enter someone else's vision and reality of how we understand this. And that's a really important, critical thing to establish as part of an academic institution, even your own. I mean, and it could be Google. We use Twitter. I have deep problems with Twitter in terms of how they close down their API and close down their model, but we've used it extensively for DS106.
Changing it, too.
Yes.
And then Hybrid Pedagogy is a journal. Some of you might know it. If you've been to the Digital Pedagogy Live, Hybrid Pedagogy is the precursor to that. And as a journal, when you think about academia and what we're trying to promote in journals, Hybrid Pedagogy is open access, but also open peer review. So it's about supporting writers to express themselves. And it's also about once you publish, people can still comment on what you've said. It's not that you publish it and that's it, and there's no way to interact with you in a dynamic way. So it allows that. It has an ethos as a journal.
Yeah.
DS106 as a course, and we didn't put this on the slides because Jim would have removed it. But that course has an ethos of collaboration and for life.
We have a joke, it's called For Life.
Yeah.
The idea that goes back to Rihanna's point about online learning is a student starts a kind of digital footprint and that follows with them and they own it and manage it as part of their identity, which is why I've been such a big opponent to the LMS. I think it creates an infrastructure that's diametrically opposed to empowering students and faculty to own their own work.
I don't know if we have time to talk about all these people, and we didn't even put their names, but these are people that we think have an ethos in the way they do things.
Yeah. Audrey Waters, Tim Owens, Martha Burtis, Alan Levine, Tressie McMillan-Cotton, and
Rebecca Hogue, Autumn Keynes, John Doe, Laura Chernovich, and Russell Robel. We're not going to have time to talk about all of them, but they're all special in different ways in the ethos that they try to keep. They keep that ethos. It's not like you have that ethos, but then you do something
we
different.
wanted to balance the idea of an ethos of a company like Google, Turnitin, or the LMS, name your one, with the ethos of people who make up the web that we use and regularly populate. I mean, it's a theme of this conference. It's a theme of how do we comport ourselves online in relationship to some of the most important questions defining our era.
And so what's AMICAL? And something we can talk about in the Digital Pedagogy Committee after lunch.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Sorry very much.
Thank you very much.